Most people have a voice in their head that never quite lets them rest. It shows up when you finish something and immediately catalogues what was wrong with it. It shows up when you wake up at 3 a.m. and starts reviewing every decision you made this week. It shows up in a moment of genuine happiness and says, "Don't get too comfortable." This voice is so constant, so familiar, that many people have never questioned whether it's actually telling the truth. It sounds like you. It uses your name, your memories, your particular brand of self-doubt. And because it's been there since you can remember, it can feel like the truest thing about you, when in fact it's one of the most constructed. This video is about where that voice came from, why it is so convincing, and what it actually takes to begin changing the conversation with it. Not silencing it, that rarely works. Changing it, that is possible. The inner critic is not a personality trait. It is not evidence of low intelligence or weakness. It is a psychological mechanism, a pattern of thinking that developed for a specific reason and has been running on autopilot ever since. Psychologists in the tradition of internal family systems describe the inner critic as a protective part of the self that believes, on some level, that criticizing you is keeping you safe. If it attacks you before anyone else does, you can be prepared. If it holds your standards impossibly high, you might never fail publicly. If it tells you that you are not good enough, you might work harder and never have to face the judgment you are most afraid of. The inner critic is not your enemy. It was trying to help you. The problem is that it developed in a specific context, usually childhood, and it has never updated its strategy to match your actual life. It is still running the same protection program in situations that no longer require it. The inner critic is almost always rooted in our early relationships, not necessarily in abuse or dramatic rupture, often in the quiet, everyday dynamics of how we were responded to when we got things wrong, when we were too loud, too sensitive, too needy, too much. Children are exquisitely attuned to the emotional responses of their caregivers. When approval and warmth felt contingent on behavior, on being good, achieving, managing emotions quietly, being useful, children learn to internalize the evaluating gaze. They become their own watcher, their own critic. They preempt the judgment by delivering it themselves. Developmental psychologist John Bowlby's attachment research shows that children will reshape their own emotional responses to stay connected to caregivers. If being distressed pushed people away, the child learns to manage distress invisibly. The inner critic is often the internalized version of that conditional environment, the voice of whoever made you feel like you had to earn your place. One of the most disorienting things about the inner critic is how factual it sounds. It doesn't say, "I feel like you're inadequate." It says, "You are inadequate. This is obvious. Here is the evidence." This is because core beliefs, the deep convictions about self that develop in childhood, don't present themselves as beliefs. They present as reality. When your inner critic says you are fundamentally not good enough, it is drawing on years of curated evidence. Every time something went wrong, every criticism, every moment of rejection, it has a file on you, and it refers to that file frequently. What it does not do is keep equal evidence on the other side. The wins get attributed to luck, the compliments get discounted. The moments of genuine competence are explained away. This selective evidence gathering is not rational, but it feels rational because it is so consistent and so fluent. If you are finding this helpful, it would mean a great deal if you subscribed to Healing Through Thoughts. I put new videos out every week, and this series in particular is one I have put a lot of care into. Just hit subscribe so you do not miss the rest of it. It is important to distinguish the inner critic from genuine self-reflection. Not all critical thinking about yourself is the inner critic. Sometimes you do something that genuinely doesn't align with your values, and noticing that and wanting to do differently is healthy. That is discernment. That is growth. The inner critic is different from discernment in several ways. Discernment is specific. I handled that conversation badly, and I want to approach it differently next time. The inner critic is global. I am bad at relationships. I always mess things up. I'm impossible to be close to. Discernment is forward-looking. The inner critic is a verdict. Discernment comes from your values. The inner critic comes from fear. Discernment leads to action. The inner critic leads to shame. And shame, as researcher Brené Brown's work extensively demonstrates, is one of the least effective motivators of change. It paralyzes rather than propels. Learning to tell the difference between your discerning self and your critic self is one of the most useful skills in this work. Acceptance and commitment therapy offers a technique called cognitive defusion, creating distance between yourself and your thoughts so that you can observe them rather than being fused with them. With the inner critic, this is particularly useful because the critic's power comes entirely from the assumption that what it says is true. Defusion doesn't mean arguing with the critic or trying to replace its thoughts with positive ones. It means changing your relationship to the thoughts, moving from "I am not good enough" to "I notice I am having the thought that I am not good enough." That small grammatical shift is not trivial. It creates space between you and the evaluation, room to ask, is this actually true? Or is this just an old pattern running again? Another defusion technique is externalizing the critic, giving it a name, a character, even a visual. When it becomes a character rather than your truth, it loses some of its authority. You can hear it, acknowledge it, and choose not to take its word for it. You do not have to believe everything you think. One of the deeper practices in working with the inner critic is what therapists call reparenting, developing an internal voice that offers what the critic cannot: warmth, perspective, patience, and the kind of honest support that a genuinely good mentor provides. This doesn't require you to have had a perfect childhood or any particular relationship. It requires you to access something you already have, the capacity for compassion that you extend readily to other people. Most people who struggle with a harsh inner critic are extraordinarily compassionate to others. They give generously, forgive readily, and show up with warmth in ways they would never extend to themselves. The reparenting practice is simple in concept. When the inner critic speaks, ask, what would I say to a close friend in this moment? What would a genuinely kind, wise person say to me right now? And then say that to yourself as yourself. This is not self-delusion. It is offering yourself the same quality of care that you already know how to give. Here are 3 things you can try this week. None of them require perfection, and all of them compound over time. First, name the critic. Give it a character, something slightly absurd, a name that distinguishes it from you. When it speaks, name it. There's Gerald again. This is not dismissal, it is distance, and distance is useful. Second, the friend test. When you notice self-critical thinking, ask, would I say this to someone I care about in the same situation? If the answer is no, and it almost always is, ask what you would say instead. Say that. Third, keep a contradiction file. Every day, write down one piece of evidence that contradicts your inner critic's main message. The critic has been building a case against you for years. You are allowed to build one in your own defense. We have covered a lot of ground today. We have looked at where the inner critic comes from, the early attachment patterns that shaped it, and why it sounds so convincing, even when it is not telling the truth. We have talked about defusion, reparenting, and the practical tools that begin to change the relationship over time. The thing I most want to leave you with is this: you do not have to believe everything you think. The inner critic is not a reliable narrator. It is a frightened protector running an old program in a situation that no longer requires it. Treating it with a little compassion, rather than fighting it or being enslaved by it, is paradoxically the most effective way to reduce its power. Thank you so much for watching this all the way through. It genuinely means a lot. If any of this resonated, please do subscribe to Healing Through Thoughts so you do not miss the rest of this series. Drop a comment below and tell me what landed most for you. I read every one. Wednesday's video in this series is on the comparison trap and validation loop. I think you will find it helpful. Take good care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one. This is Healing Through Thoughts. See you soon.